Good day, everyone. My name is Bolanle Aishat Akinwande. I'm the Director of Academic Planning of Ladoke Akintola University of Technology, Ogbomoso in Nigeria. My presentation is on learning outcomes and constructive alignment, together with assessments for blended learning. By way of outline, my presentation will cover Bloom's taxonomy of the cognitive domain, development of learning outcomes, explanation of the concept of constructive alignment and backward design, and assessment in blended learning. At the end of this period, whoever listens to this presentation will be able to describe the theory of Bloom's taxonomy of cognitive skills, write learning outcomes, develop constructive aligned course with backward design, and use different assessment methods to measure competencies. My first presentation will be on Bloom's taxonomy and learning outcomes. What is Bloom's taxonomy? In its simplest form, taxonomy is the science of organizing things and classifying them into different forms based on certain criteria. So Bloom's taxonomy can be indicated as a categorization that defines different levels of intelligence, which include thinking, learning, and understanding. It has three domains. The first is cognitive, the second one is affective domain, and the third one is psychomotor domain. Bloom's taxonomy indicates hierarchy of learning objectives, and this is for each of the three taxonomies. And it is used to improve curriculum, assessment, and teaching methods for students. Our interest will be on Bloom's taxonomy of cognitive domain, which is knowledge-based. In 1956, Benjamin Bloom developed the cognitive domain, which has six levels of cognitive skills and learning objectives in an hierarchical model that mimics a pyramid. And these skills are from the lowest order of thinking skill to the highest order of thinking skill. And the first level is the knowledge, and it moves up to number 6, which is evaluation. And each step of the pyramid from bottom to top represents a move from lower order thinking skill to higher order thinking skill. In 2001, Anderson and Krathwohl revised the original cognitive domain of 1956 because of the need in order to make it better suited for modern relevance. Still the same level of 6 cognitive skills, but 2 things happen. The first is that the noun word for each of the levels changed to verb, and the knowledge of the original was changed to remember. The second higher level comprehension was changed to understand. Application was changed to apply. Analysis was changed to analyze. And the last 2 levels were flopped. That is, number 5, synthesis was changed to create, which moved to number 6 of the revised version. and the evaluation of number 6 came to be number 5. So those are the major differences from the original and the revised one. And it is the revised version that is being put to use to date. Who are the beneficiaries of Bloom's taxonomy? There are categories of beneficiaries. The first major beneficiary is teachers. And how does this happen? Bloom's taxonomy is one of the many tools that faculty staff can use to create effective instruction materials. It helps teachers to develop higher order critical thinking abilities in students. It helps teachers as well to identify the intellectual level at which individual students are capable of working, because what is expected at 100 at the first level, the first 2 levels, is not the same that will be expected of students at almost final levels of their academic life. For the teachers, breaking the relevance into different categories for the planning process, Bloom's taxonomy serves as a very good resource for writing course objectives and learning outcomes. And this is from the very simple one, the lowest level, to the most complex one, which is the highest level. It helps to move students through the process of learning from the most fundamental remembering and understanding, the first 2 levels, to the more complex evaluating and creating, the last 2 levels. And this is according to the ability of the students. It provides a lot of related verbs that align with each of the levels that educators can use to plan lessons. We would see more of these verbs, how they are used to develop lesson objectives and how they are also used to develop expected learning outcomes of students. It is of use in planning new or revised existing curricula and also to test the relevance of course goals as well as objectives. In the area of setting classroom activities, how instructions are delivered, it encourages teachers to design instruction that are aimed at critical thinking. It is a very effective tool that helps educators to create purposeful learning activities in the classroom, and this is in relation to the set of objectives. And it also finds very good use in planning homework and in-class or remote assignments, such as curation, reflection, team-based learning, problem solving, among others. In the area of getting to access the students, it finds a very good use as assessment tool. And the first is that it helps to ask questions that encourage critical thinking in students. It is of use in preparing examination questions and in assessing the extent to which the objectives of a lesson are met. It helps to develop assessment questions that reveal students' overall comprehension and mastery of a subject, and this is in relation to the learning outcomes. In its simplest form, when teaching lower division introductory courses, mastering of objectives at the lower level is measured, as shown in the Bloom's taxonomy. The lower first 2 are evaluated for lower category of students. Well, when teaching more advanced upper division courses, students' abilities at the higher levels of the taxonomy are what should be accessed. Students are also beneficiaries of Bloom's taxonomy. And how does this happen? Before students, with the outcome-based education, students have information about what they expect to be knowledgeable in any course, even before they start to audit the course. So with the information on learning outcomes, students have a clearer view of the path to their ultimate destination. Clear learning outcomes encourage students to focus on their studies and also reflect on their progress. Students are able to develop high-order critical thinking abilities, to develop skills that employers want against over-memorization of courseworks, as it happens in traditional learning. Institutions are also beneficiaries because institutions find taxonomy to be of use in developing curricula that the industries demand. because at the highest level of the taxonomy, the skills that the students acquire are what will be of use in industries. Moving with the taxonomy, we will now get to see how some action verbs are used to indicate intellectual ability and the amount of knowledge that students are expected to gain through learning as they move from the lowest level to the highest level. The lowest level, which is the first level, is the level of remember, as we saw. At this level, students are just expected to recall facts and the basic concepts of what they have been taught in the class. So nothing much for them to learn here, but just to be able to repeat verbatim as they were taught. So the active verbs are found here are the likes of define, highlight, list, repeat, memorize, reproduce, select, and maybe a few others. At the next higher level is the level of understanding. At this level, students are expected to express understanding of what they have been taught by explaining certain ideas or concepts. And with this, we have some relevant verbs here. Students are expected to be able to summarize, interpret, exemplify, classify, compare, explain, and discuss. At the next higher level is the level of apply. And at this level, students are expected to use information in new situations. That is, they should be able to demonstrate their ability to use the information in new ways. And the verbs that are of use here are the likes of demonstrate, dramatize, solve, use, and prepare. The next level is the ability of the students to analyze. And at this level, they're expected to make connections, to recognize patterns and deeper meanings, draw connections among ideas. And the active verbs that find use here are the likes of criticize, differentiate, classify, distinguish, experiment, discriminate. The next higher level is evaluate. And the students here are expected to be able to make and justify a judgment. That means they should be able to develop an opinion and back it up with reasoning and evidence. And the active verbs here are the likes of review, appraise, argue, defend, and investigate. And the final highest level of critical thinking is the level of create, which means at this level, the students are expected to be able to produce new or original work, to create a new product, new concept, or new approaches based on what they have been taught over the years of their study. And the words, active verbs here, are the likes of to synthesize, to formulate, to develop, to generate, to construct, to design. So from this, we now move on to learning outcomes. What are learning outcomes? They are the statements of desired results of learning that are expressed in words that make it clear how measurement can be achieved. They are things that students would see, that teachers will be able to express what would happen to students at the end of the day, what the students will be able to do. They provide a basis for measuring and reporting on students' achievement, and also they provide possibilities to achieve curriculum alignment. We'll talk more about the curriculum alignment in due course. So formulating learning outcomes now, because learning outcomes are supposed to be formulated at the beginning. 3 steps are involved, but at the end of the day, each learning outcome is to come as one sentence. The first step is the step of general introductory phrase. And this is something like, after successful completion of this module, this course, program as it applies. After, for example, after successful completion of this course, students will be able to, and this is what will open the list of learning outcomes. And this takes us to the next step, which is where active verbs are expressed. And these active verbs are the ones that will describe the cognitive level that the students are. And with this, we now go back to the taxonomy, to the cognitive taxonomy, cognitive domain of Bloom's taxonomy, from remember to create. We should recall that the likes of remember, understand are more applicable to students at the lower level, while the likes of evaluate and create are more relevant for students at higher level. So this will now we'll still come back to this. We'll use some of the words that I just expressed for each of the 6 levels at this place. So that will take us to the third level, to the third step, which is description of measurable content. And what does this mean? I will give an example. At least 4 pedagogic techniques in micro teaching. I would now like to relate, especially number 2, steps 2 and 3 together. For like 100 level students in the first year, they are the lowest level of the cognitive, at the lower level of cognition. So for remember, we remember there are some active verbs there, the likes of highlight. So if this learning outcome is for 100 level students, it can be that after successful completion of this course, students will be able to highlight at least 4 pedagogic techniques in micro teaching. The same thing can still apply to students at the final level. And if we are measuring the level, students at the final level, it will now be after successful completion of this course, students will be able to teach at least 4 pedagogic techniques in micro teaching. We can see how this relates and how they differ and how they can be used based on the level that the students have. So there are, in trying to formulate learning outcomes, there are basic information that will be provided here. The first is that learning outcomes are formulated from the student's perspective, and they must begin with an action verb. Learning outcomes should be clear, observable, and measurable, and also reflect what will be included in the course or program requirements in terms of assignments, exams, projects, and many others. It could be about 6. There is no fast rule about it. This is just about maybe a bit below or even more. But for a course, having about 6 learning outcomes seems to be ideal. Learning outcomes should be 1 sentence and could be numbered. Complicated sentences and abbreviations should be avoided, and they should be simple and unambiguous. Simple and unambiguous terms should be used when describing the content, such that whoever comes across it will have good understanding, most importantly, students that they are meant for. And lastly, they should not be complex, but rather kept in a simple form. My next presentation will be on constructive alignment and backward design. So the first one is the constructive alignment, which is simply a phrase of 2 words, constructive and alignment. The constructive is what the learner does, which is the understanding, the learning. The alignment is what the teacher does, which is teaching and assessment. So these 2 words come together to form constructive alignment, and this means, in simplest form, constructive alignment means coordination of teaching and learning. In another form, it could just be indicated as constructivist didactics, which is that the interest is to have an outcome-based education. And this is not the same with the traditional mode of teaching, where the teacher only has control, is only interested in what he wishes to have the students to be informed on. But with the constructivist didactics, what the teacher should be interested in is what students need to learn or what they need to be able to do at the end of the day, but not what the teacher needs to teach. And also, the teacher is also should be interested in how well students will perform to be able to demonstrate that they have good understanding of what they have been taught. Constructive alignment, as said before, is an example of outcome-based approach to teaching. So what does this mean? Learning is the result of the constructive activity of the students. Teaching is effective when it is able to support those activities that are appropriate to achieving the curriculum objectives and thereby encourage students to adopt a deep approach to learning. This is according to Biggs, 1999. The essence of supporting students to learn in a sustainable way is a process of fostering learning by aligning teaching and assessment to expected learning outcome. And this is how this word constructive alignment comes to being. Constructive alignment takes place when the curriculum is designed in a way that the teaching and learning methods or activities and forms of assessment are aligned with the intended learning outcomes, which are things that students should be able to be equipped with at the end of the learning process. Constructive alignment is a means of coordinating teaching and learning activities and assessment methods in such a way that they support students' learning to achieve the expected learning outcomes. So the link between constructive alignment and backward design. Expected learning outcomes are the qualifications that one expects students to have achieved after attending a course, as was indicated earlier. The systematic way of aligning expected learning outcomes, teaching and assessment methods in a study program or a course is what is known as constructive alignment, as indicated also. Constructive alignment is best done by thinking backwards. That is, by starting by defining the intended outcomes of a study program. And this is what is known as backward design. The usual traditional teaching style is more of a forward design, where teaching will start, assessment will follow, and whatever students can learn at the end of the day is what they just pick. There is no definition for that. But when it is done in the reverse form, having intended outcomes first before assessment and teaching, that is what backward design is about. Backward design prioritizes the expected learning outcomes instead of topics to be covered. Outcome-based education coming out again. In backward design for constructive alignment, an example here is study program development. When a study program is to be developed, the usual practice is to have some courses that students will need to audit before they can get to earn their bachelor degree. So also there will have to be information on how the students would have to be assessed. That is, how to determine if students have acquired the intended competencies before they can earn the degree. And also, there will be information on expected learning outcomes, which is the qualifications that the program is aiming at. Simply put, they are what the students will be able to do after completing the program. So thinking backward now, the first thing that has to be done, and that is the step one, is to develop learning outcomes on study program level. The key word here is program, is the program. At program level, learning outcomes must be developed. And also the step two is to be able to determine acceptable evidence for a successful learning process. While step three will be to develop learning outcomes on course level. This is the key word again. The step one is for program level. Step three is to develop learning outcomes on course level and the assessment techniques as well as teaching methods that will be used to do the teaching. So this is just what I said earlier, expected learning outcome, forms of assessment being designed in relation to the expected learning outcome, and also having teaching and learning methods being designed in relation to the expected learning outcomes. So as I said earlier, what comes first? Expected learning outcomes. And this is to identify and define the expected learning outcomes, which are what students will be able to do at the end of the course in terms of expected knowledge, skills, and competencies. And also be able to formulate, at this level, one should be able to formulate specific, clear, and realistic outcomes. And lastly, whatever are the expected learning outcomes should be reduced in a meaningful way, such that it will be done in a didactic manner that will be feasible, not something that is bogus. The next one is to develop forms of assessment in relation to expected learning outcomes. And simply put, one needs to choose forms of assessment that will be able to test the expected learning outcomes. And at the assessment should be able to show how well a given student's level of performance is able to meet the intended learning outcomes. And the third one is the teaching and learning methods should be done in a way to meet expected learning outcomes. So what needs to be done here is to create the sequence of lessons for the course, to select teaching and learning methods and activities that are likely to ensure that the intended learning outcomes are achieved by the students. Constructive alignment. What does it mean to different learners? It is important that assessment is properly aligned with teaching activities because it influences how students learn. What this is saying is when when students know that they will only be assessed based on what they have been taught and based on the expected learning outcomes that they have information on at the end of the day, the students will be in a good position to know what part of the book to read to be able to succeed with a particular exam that is to test their knowledge. So student A may just see something. If they've been taught quantum physics and he sees a theory in a textbook, hey, this theory is interesting for quantum physics. Such students will just go study that, learn it, and go for the examination, and will be able to do well. Student B also should be able to know if reading particular chapters of a book will be able to meet up, will be able to treat, will be able to explain the details of the topic that has been taught in the class. He will know that reading these particular chapters would enable him to perform brilliantly in the class. So my next presentation will be on assessment in blended learning. Why assessment in the first instance? In a nutshell, in summary, assessment serves as the quality assurance and quality improvement in terms of student participation. And this is what an institution must be able to do for students as a means of quality assurance. So assessment is an important part of both face-to-face and distance education. And this is a means to judge and evaluate the competencies that students have been able to achieve at the end of the lessons. It is a process of gathering information on what students know based on their educational experience. The results of assessments are typically used to identify areas where improvement is needed and also to ensure that the course content meets learning needs. The teachers can critically reflect on activities to judge the quality of endeavors and also to seek quality improvement wherever needs arise. University is a means of universities' accountability to students in terms of quality assurance system, that is quality of learning outcomes and unit evaluation. There are two types of assessment. The first one is the formative assessment, and the second one is the summative assessment. The two of them are used in different ways based on the need. So blended learning includes both formative and summative assessments in both the face-to-face and online classes. So the first one I'll be talking about is formative assessment. Formative assessment monitors students' learning processes and progress, and it provides feedback on strengths and weaknesses of teaching and learning activities. It is carried out during the course of teaching, and mainly formative assessment is to enable diagnostic activities. It's for diagnostic purposes, that is, to be able to check the progress of the course, how much the students are getting to know what is being taught. And when the information comes out, it will enable the teacher to make adjustments accordingly. It involves the response by the teacher to the needs of the students, and it helps to modify and improve teaching and learning activities. It is mostly carried out at the beginning or during a course. This is a very unique thing about formative assessment. It is done at the beginning to check the level of the students, their knowledge. It is also done during the course to enable to make proper changes when need be, proper improvement to discover where students are lacking and do more. In a nutshell, formative assessment is part of the teaching process rather than the grading process. The next one is summative assessment, which is sometimes referred to as final exam, and it measures what students have learned after completing a course. You can see this. This one comes at the end of the course or midway into a course, which is what is mostly referred to as continuous assessment. It facilitates grading that reflects the student's performance in comparison to certain standards on benchmarks, and that is why some students are categorized as scoring A, some scoring F, based on standards or benchmarks. It is mostly used for judgmental purposes, that is the extent to which goal and objectives of the course have been achieved and how some certain standards have been able to be reached. Examples of summative assessment are written examinations by questions or essays, or oral examination by oral questions or demonstration of practical skills. In a nutshell, summative assessment enables a grade to be generated that reflects students' performance at the end of the day. The two types of assessments are indicated with examples of modes of carrying out the assessment. For formative assessment, we have the likes of rubrics, short quizzes, peer evaluations, discussions, writing samples through charts, one-on-one student-teacher interviews, and student self-reflections, or exit tickets at the end of the class, which is just a means of teacher having the how students perceive the class that has just been taught. While examples of summative assessment include tests of a chunk of content. Most part of what is being taught is what questions come up on, and it features periodically at the middle or end of the course, and it is standardized to support comparisons among students or group of students. So at this level, we have categories of scores for them to know who is best, who is not, based on standards. I would like to quickly just talk about Rubric, which is an example of formative assessment. Rubric is a performance-based assessment tool that gathers data about students' progress on a particular assignment of skill. It has sets of criteria for grading by articulating specific components and expectations. Assessment rubrics describe scoring schemes that help to evaluate and make judgment on the quality of a given student performance. This is in relation to the learning outcomes. There are two types of rubrics and methods for evaluating students' efforts. The first one is analytic rubrics, and this is a two-dimensional rubric with levels of achievement as columns and assessment criteria indicated along the rows. It assesses students' achievement based on multiple criteria and using just one single rubric. Such criteria are presented in separated categories and rated individually. Just by example, we have the performance dimension indicated along the column, and we have series of information that will describe the performance of the students to earn a specific grade from pass to, from A score, the higher, the best, to the fail or to the least score. There are information that would describe the scoring, what to be scored, what the student should be scored based on the performance in an examination. And the second one is holistic rubrics. And this is a single criteria rubric. It is a one-dimensional that is used to assess participants' overall achievement on an activity based on predefined achievement level. Example also is this one that has just this particular rubric is for to assess a presentation during an oral examination. And we can see the categories of information on the performance that will dictate the score to be awarded to the candidate. So the last thing I'll be talking about is just on methods of assessment with expected competencies and learning formats. And what do I mean? With the forms of assessments, there are different ways. In addition to those two that were indicated, I have series of forms of assessment here, and with information on the competencies that are to be assessed in students. And lastly, the learning format for the students to be able to do well in the assessment. The first category is on thesis, the defense of a thesis. Competencies that are to be assessed while doing this is the ability to develop and analyze research questions, ability to apply theoretical knowledge in the thesis, the structure of the thesis, ability to develop and apply effective working methods to finish the thesis, and also the ability of the students to work under time constraints to meet deadlines. So what would help the students to be able to do well in this assessment is the likes of colloquium, seminar, and problem-solving exercises in the course of the time as when they were being taught. The next category has to do with written essays or reports, analysis of text, data, and cases, fieldwork report, work placement report, and project report. And competencies to be assessed here include the likes of the ability to analyze and reflect theoretical knowledge, ability to differentiate theoretical approaches, ability to use scientific methods effectively, ability to solve problems set by the lecturer, to conduct increasingly complex research, the survey of literature, how well it is done, ability to reflect professional skills during work placement or during the field work. And the teaching and learning formats include reading lecture, study cases, small group work, problem solving, mentoring, supervision of work placement, and project action plan, project work, and research group. For the category of oral discussion, interview, or debate, the ability to communicate interactively with different stakeholders is very important here, and it is checked. Ability to present orally information on analysis, results, and others. Ability to summarize theoretical knowledge orally, and the ability to reflect critically and discuss research questions. So teaching and learning formats include research seminar, reading lecture, project, and fieldwork. And the next one is written examination, which is more of the summative assessment. The ability of students to repeat, summarize, analyze, reflect, and understand theoretical knowledge. And the teaching and learning format here is research seminar and reading lecture. And the last one is the assessment using multiple choice. The ability that is competency checked here is the ability to understand theoretical knowledge, while reading lecture is the teaching and learning format. The takeaway from this presentation, which is by way of conclusion, Bloom's revised taxonomy is one of the many tools that faculty can use to create effective and meaningful instruction. It is used to plan new or revise existing curricula, to test the relevance of course goals and objectives, to design instruction, assignment, and activities, and also to develop assessments. Learning outcomes can be derived from Bloom's taxonomy, although it is most commonly used to assess learning on a variety of cognitive levels. Constructive alignment is an outcome-based approach to teaching, in which the learning outcomes that students are intended to achieve are defined before teaching. Backward design framework suggests that teachers should start with learning goals, create or plan assessment, and finally consider how to teach the lesson. Assessment is done to evaluate and improve students' learning, but the objective can vary slightly depending on the type of assessment that is used. I have some selected references here that were very useful in the course of coming up with this presentation. I thank you all for listening and for watching this video.